your most valuable resource is time. So if you can raise money to accelerate things in time you shut, there's huge dividends to be paid for the winner of a space. Say you don't have access to capital, but you're like, I have 1 million users who are down to try my product, you're going to get access to capital.
I mean, just to start off, just so the listeners can understand who you are and like who you are as a founder, me and Michael went through Y Combinator way back when in winter 2011 when it was cool, but it wasn't like what it is now. Now I think Y Combinator is like a huge machine where, you know, everyone out there knows about Y Combinator and everybody wants to be part of Y Combinator. He was in a company called TalkBin. And TalkBin was this like cool startup, and he had like really smart like co-founders. Like your team was super sharp, and I think you guys stood above the crowd just from like honestly the tenacity of like you and your co-founders. And I think what I saw in you guys, which blew me away, was like my very first acquisition. Michael's company TalkBin was the first acquisition out of our batch. And it stood out to me and it blew me away. I was like, wow, they did it. And I remember talking to you and your co-founders afterwards, and you were just like excited about like what had happened. And I think it was like this like excitement, like, hey, we did it. Like you were able to like build something, and then like it got acquired so fast. I don't even know like when you started the company, but you got into YC and then it was like acquired like so fast after. But let's start there.
Yeah,
Like let's start this moment in time. Like
I think it's funny. I didn't want to interrupt you, but two things. I think within YC history at the time, and two, it's funny when I look back. I remember thinking your team was super experienced. Like we had like good resumes. Like Cash went to Harvard. I just remember you guys, for whatever reason, my mind stood out as people who had like real startup experience. Like you guys had been doing it for long. Healthcare is not easy. You guys are in that space, and in some ways, you made the call.
Perceptually at the time, like you just don't know who's going to be the winners, but like how did you guys do that so fast? Like was it right place, right time, right idea? I remember it was a good idea too. So just I'll tell people like what TalkBin was. Imagine going to IKEA and you just don't know what aisle to go in for like one item. You guys had this big vision of like basically like on your phone telling people exactly where the item was that they're looking for as fast as possible. Am I pitching it wrong? Is that?
It was a bunch of different things. At its core, it was this idea of you could take out your phone and text the business owner. That could be for feedback. It could be suggestions. It could be, like what you said, finding inventory. But there was so many stuff. A lot of it ended up being feedback post experience. And people always thought it was like, oh, why not write a full review? And people just don't want to write reviews. Let's say like we had this random example where like, let's say the bathroom's dirty. That's sort of like, and you actually love the restaurant, but whatever reason the bathroom's dirty, it's actually like you might want a 5-star review, but you might want to let the business owner know, and they actually want to know that. They don't want to Yelp like the bathroom's dirty because maybe it's just a one-off. Maybe you come there all the time, you love the restaurant, and the review tells you about how good the food is and everything, but you just want to leave some quick feedback in there. Maybe you don't want to like go up to the business owner and be like, hey, by the way. And so we would just get all that feedback, deliver it, get it to the right response. In the early days, and you got to keep in mind this is 2011 before everybody realized how big mobile was going to be, and now texting solutions. We were one of the early users of Twilio, so a lot of this again was innovated back in the day. Like you can imagine today, you sort of see it today, and like people using QR codes for their menus. Like everybody's using their mobile phones to consume this information, but keep in mind it wasn't the case years and years ago. So that was sort of the opportunity, and again, I can go into the acquisition itself, but again, that's a completely separate story. But yeah, great memory. I know that was a long time ago.
I mean, you saw something a lot of people didn't. Like, I remember Uber becoming like, it wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing. Like there was no DoorDash. There was no Instacart.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys were like the first, like really one of the first companies to have this like connection outside of just being in the physical store, right? Like a lot of these companies just, you go into the store, you buy your item and you leave, and that was it. There was no more interaction. I guess, like, why did you guys do YC? Like, what was that a plan? And how did you guys even as co-founders get together for that company?
Easy/doable in a lot of ways. I think they started companies sometimes it's easier than a turnaround situation. And I remember like going to these cubicle farms, and he and I were the only people really interested in starting companies. And we became friends because we were reading Hacker News. We first heard about YC just because we were reading Hacker News, reading PG's essays. And, to this day, he's such a brilliant thinker. But you got to say, a decade ago, nobody was really writing about it. You didn't have like Gary Tan's YouTube videos, all these people talking about what it means to start a company. Now I think it's a lot more commodity to know like how to start a company, what are the things you need to do. But I do think a decade, like I started looking at probably Hacker News 15 years ago, where like really nobody was talking about how to start a company. Nobody's giving this advice. And PG was out there giving it for free and ultimately having this program. So Cass and I were both like big fans of PG. Sonny was working at Google, was doing his master's at Stanford, and Cass, I think, met him through one of his PhD advisors. I honestly, it's been a decade plus, I think exactly I met. So Cass was wanting to put together a team, and obviously became really close all through that. But we actually first met at my first job out of undergrad, and Cass's job out of MBA, and Sonny through just Google and Stanford.
So your team was like friends. Like you guys were genuinely friends before you started, like just passionate friends talking about Hacker News, working together.
Yeah, we're talking about Hacker News. I remember Casser was brainstorming ideas, so he'd always be like in between meetings, like, "Hey, you want to brainstorm ideas in the whiteboard?" And we just whiteboard stuff. We're talking about building like a point of sale system at one point in time. Like, Casser was on batch. I think you remember him, always full of ideas and living a dream, trying to figure out if there's a startup to be done.
How did you actually leave the job to work on the startup? Was it just let's give up on the job and just go start this? Let's quit. Like what made it happen?
So Cash had always wanted to do a startup. Me too. I was a little bit tighter on Cash. So Cash, I remember, quit his job, moved, like I gotta give him the ton of respect. He just drove out to Silicon Valley with an idea, but not a whole lot beyond that. And I was saving up a little bit more money. I'm like, I'm ready to quit whatever. And he was like, let's apply to YC, see what happens. And when we got to YC, I officially quit. Like, I think I was already like ready to quit, but we just didn't have any money. I had some savings. And it's funny, like if you remember YC back in the day, it was like, $20K for a team.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot.
Nothing. Like, it was nothing. And we still were like, that's what was needed. And went out there, quit my job and just drove out. Everyone was like really, really bad car driving across from Chicago to California.
You get a lot of the true believers when you're not getting a lot of money. I actually think you quitting your job and knowing it's only it was like $20K for you guys. I don't know how it varied a little bit, but that's like what, 3 months of life living or 5 months, or 10 months at most if you're all living together in the same apartment. Like it's not a lot of money. So like, were you stressed?
And I remember my parents being like, what are you doing? Because I think I just got a promotion at work and the money's so little to do this. But I also I always wanted to do a startup, and that's all it took. Honestly, it wasn't even the idea. Or we will pivot around, we're doing things, but I found a group of people I really enjoyed working with. And I think that honestly was the impetus, even beyond YC. I was like, I want to work with this group of people. I want to work with Cash. I want to work with Sonny. And it just so happens we're all willing to quit our jobs. And, YC was so checking on top to adapt a forcing mechanism, but we were ready to go on it already.
Was I guess you were living near Yale, right? And then you moved on to your job, but where was that for you to how far away from Silicon Valley?
Chicago. Yeah.
Chicago. Okay. Yeah, so it's far.
Yeah.
It's far.
It was a 2 or 3 day drive. I don't know why. I guess I was moving all my stuff, so I didn't even fly out. I just drove halfway across the country, I guess. Exactly, Chicago to San Francisco.
Were you ever in San Francisco before, or Mountain View before, or no?
Not really. I remember I did a summer session at Stanford, and I had visited San Francisco, but we also came out there for the YC interview, so I flew out there for that, but never had lived there for a long period of time.
You don't have to answer this question, but I guess, did you have a lot of money? Was it a couple of months? Was it a month? Was it 5 months of savings?
So what we did was the YC money was designed to pay for our apartment. Actually, we paid for our food also, but I know it paid for our apartment. So, and we were not spending a lot. I don't think I went out. I was driving at one point in time. I think it was top 10 worst cars in America a day with Lano. So I literally never heard of the brand since then. I no expenses, but I remember being stressed as I watched my savings dip a little bit. I honestly forget what the runway of my personal savings was because it just, it didn't go down that much. It didn't go up, but it would just go
Yeah.
down a little bit for food and stuff. But, we used the 20,000 for YC to pay for an apartment. So that was less. So, but yeah, I do remember every month, I had bought a calendar and I had put a date on it because I knew it was probably close to running out of money at that time. But this is years ago, so I don't remember the date. But it was months, not years. But again, we had gotten expenses down to insanely small degree. So it wasn't like I was burning a ton personally. It was just like, okay, eat food, the apartment paid for. I mean, the apartment's the biggest expense, and my car was not expensive at all. I had a car insurance, and that's about it. Yeah, I think I remember my parents being. This is before Obamacare and everything like that, and I was like, oh shoot, I need to get health care. But that was like maybe a month into the company, and my parents kept pressuring me, so I got health care.
Yeah, I didn't have healthcare for
Oh, really?
2 years.
Oh, wow.
2 years
Wow.
for starting the company. I was
That's
just
crazy.
I mean, is it really that crazy when you're younger and like you have that?
I think I didn't want to get healthcare, but my parents like knew me out. Like I think my parents are stressed out for me, and I feel stressed because they feel stressed.
They were worried you'd get hit by a car or something,
Yeah.
or get sick or something.
Yeah.
Were your parents entrepreneurs? Like, there's something in you that also like made you want to do this. Like, were your parents like they were supportive in some way because like they said do it, like they didn't stop you?
My parents weren't traditional entrepreneurs, but they came to US with $200. They had a way tougher job trying to make it with honestly not great English. Like I think they had a harder time. Like being on that's like as big of entrepreneur, as big a risk as you can take, moving to a completely different country where you barely speak the language with $300, not 20,000, not anything, and to survive and like not have funding. And so I think they were super entrepreneurial for the life stage they were in, and credit to my parents, they ended up sending 2 kids to Harvard. I went to Harvard Business School actually after the startup, and my sister went to Harvard Law with no connections, no money. I'm super grateful. I was on financial aid at Yale, so I didn't have a lot of debt coming out of school. That's probably one of the only reasons I could do startups, and I get a lot of credit. And my parents helped a lot with at least the debt part of things. They weren't able to support in a lot of other ways, but their dad and just being supportive in general. Like for super Asian parents who wanted me to be a doctor, they were very open to do a startup. They were like, hey, you gotta make sure you get healthcare. We're concerned for you. Make sure you have like everything set. And it's funny. Like I do think at a certain point in time, like I think it was post acquisition. I forget exactly what, and I was like, I can't give you advice anymore because you've done stuff that we didn't think was possible.
So your parents, I mean, this is a kind of a non-obvious thing when your parents are supportive. It makes it easier. Like when you have
much easier. I get a lot of my credit. My parents like a sporting education, like doing a lot of stuff. They're like, you should go to a great school, like an Ivy League school, even if you have to take on debt. We're super supportive of this. Like a lot of parents might be like, get a full ride somewhere else, and they were always super supportive of the risk I ended up taking. And again, like I said, they took the biggest risk, way bigger than I ever did.
So they created boldness in you because you saw like what they went through, and you're like, I could just drive across country. Who cares?
Yeah, that's nothing. They both, speak English in Chicago, speak English in San Francisco. Imagine being like, you got to go to a different country and try to make a life out of it. Like that is not easy.
Yeah. I guess okay. So reversing a little bit, it sounds like you were raised from like immigrant parents in like the U.S. Like, how did you even get to Yale? Like what was the track there? Like, what did you like? What were you want? What did you imagine doing like before even getting into Yale? Like,
I do remember the moments where like I knew I had a higher chance. I had a perfect SAT score in my junior year, and in my junior year, so I knew like, hey, there's a chance. I used to go to school. I had solid grades. One thing I'm super grateful is my freshman English teacher just happened to also run student government, and she had told me about it. And I done student government. I looked like we had a bunch of really smart Asian kids. One of them went to MIT, one went to Caltech, and I was the one who went to the Ivy League stuff because I liked a little bit different, right? Like I'd done student government, that's not typical. And so I think that helped, like I knew I wanted to go to a good school, and I'd applied to a few different places, and just so happened like I had applied to Yale early, which is another funny story because I remember debating between Harvard and Yale and a couple other schools, and my sister and my mom watched a lot of Gilmore Girls. And so they said you should apply to Yale early. And I was like, yeah, it's all the same to me. Like, I think it's like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, whatever it is. Like, yeah, they all are about the same. And so I applied to Yale early and ended up getting in. And yeah, I was super grateful for that. And I do think it partially was like grades, SAT score. And, you know, I didn't look like a typical like pure academic. I had done student government and stuff like that. And that helped a little bit too.
Just thinking about the psychology of the YC partners back then when they were interviewing you, they went to Harvard and they went to Yale. Like you had some of them that went to Yale. Like I think Michael Seibel
Yeah.
went to Yale. I
Yeah.
don't know if you know that. And there's a few
Yeah.
others like
So
Justin Kahn. So
that actually influenced me too. I remember, I think it was freshman year, whatever it is, they had launched us on TV and I was on the Yale Daily News. And I think that's so cool. And again, I didn't know that. I know them now, but I didn't know them at the time. But I think they were seniors when I was a freshman. And again, I thought I'd go into finance when I went to Yale. I remember thinking like the obvious stuff and this is before computer science was huge. So it's like, do I become a lawyer, a doctor, or a finance person, or go into consulting? And I just always been a little bit afraid of blood. I'm like, I don't want to deal with that. I'm sure if I did, my parents would want me to be a doctor. And my dad's like, I'll go into finance. So I studied economics at Yale. It wasn't until I saw examples of these people starting companies that got me inspired to start a company.
In a weird way, there was like the early people at YC were like Harvard, Yale. I see it as like Harvard, Yale. And then, you know, the others started to come in later on. Like, but I think that was like the original camp was like, you had Paul Graham from Harvard, you had Jessica Livingston, and then you had like the other partners of YC from Harvard. And then you got the early recruits for like the first batches from like Yale. So it was like a very much like early days. That was like so that might have influenced them letting you in. They're like, he's like a Michael Seibel. Okay, so fast forwarding a little bit, like the day that you pitched YC, what was that like? You're sitting in their offices for the first time. Do you remember that day? I don't know if you have. Is it blurry or is it?
It's blurry except for certain parts. So one, I remember a couple of things. I remember Harge reached out with questions. And so we're like, oh, I mean, it means they're paying attention to our application. We're super excited about that. I forget if I've ever told Harge that story, but I do remember Harge being one of the people to reach out in video because like he reached out to a couple of companies like, hey, can I get a couple questions answered or whatever it is? And it doesn't mean that like you got in or not got in, but it means at least paid attention to your application. During the interview, I remember like, it's pretty intimidating, like PG probably, it's like the OG members of YC all interviewing at the same time. Like now they split up a lot more, so you never know if you're getting which partner. But back in the day, it was always the same partners. I remember part of it wasn't great. Like we were like at one point in time, there like at least one of the partners like, I don't know if I'd actually use this. And we gave an example, and I honestly forget what it was, to be honest. After all these years, and I'm gonna butcher this, but it might have been like even something like Coupa Cafe talking to PG, like, hey, imagine you're sitting there and something, whatever it is, and you use TalkBin to get in contact with business owner. And it's funny, like, and I do think it was Coupa, honestly, again, it's a decade plus now, like, it was like, at least one of the partners was like, I don't know if I'd use this. And then PG was like, we gave an example of PG, like, you know what, I can imagine that. I can imagine myself using it in that scenario. And it's funny, later on, we actually did sell to Coupa Cafe, and he could use it like that. And like, one of the more interesting ones is like, Coupa became this like marquee customer because a lot of VCs would go there. And people are like, oh, you know, TalkBin's everywhere because we're just like very concentrated in Palo Alto. And you actually saw some really cool use cases where, like, and I remember one message at least was like, there was really loud music playing. And again, that's not like, and they literally like texted the owner, it's like, hey, the music's a little bit loud. And it just so happened the owner was there and he could control the music. And he was like, how is it now? Within like 4 or 5 minutes. And it seemed like such a small thing, but you really understood the value of TalkBin, of like the real-time nature, the intimate nature of it. It's really cool. Like we saw instance after instance of almost this kind of real-time communication that was like high responsiveness.
I mean, even now, everything you're talking about is relevant today. Like I went to a Y Combinator after party, and this one guy cranked up the music so loud. And I didn't want to say, I'm not going to say anything, but like I could see other founders just be like, ooh, my ears.
Yeah. It's anonymous too. Like you have an anonymous message. So unless you share, yeah.
And that's so smart. And it's such a little thing to make like a venue so much nicer.
Yeah.
right? The idea was spot on. It was a really, really good idea. I think whatever you guys work on, I was like, it's super interesting to me, and I really liked it. But I mean, you went through YC, it was like a blur. I remember there was a day, it was a very weird day. It was Paul Graham invited us all in there. Remember this time? Paul Graham invited us in, and then there was a AnyBot that came in.
Yes.
Maybe
And
you
he
could
was
talk
like this.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to hear like your perspective of this day, because like before that day, I think the world of accelerators was very different. And maybe you could talk about that a little bit. And like, I don't think a lot of people know this one day, and we just happened to be there before like the world changed for accelerators.
It's funny. PG had said, "It's like, hey, this might be the biggest news in YC history," and that's when they came out with, the 100K investment into companies, which was called Start Fund at the time, and is now like the standard YC deal today. It's even larger than that, right? I haven't read the latest YC docs, but like hundreds of thousands, maybe. You might know better than me how big the checks are in YC today, but it was a big game changer. Like a few things I remember just like years later, people were like, oh, like Winter 11 is considered anything around that time, or maybe that's the cutoff, is consistency, because it was, you really had to be all in to, like 20K is just not enough. First of all, 100K and now 200K, 300K ends up being like, that's 500K, ends up being enough funding that it is enough to give it a real shot for a while. Like you really had to go for your savings. And now you don't, which I think is great. I don't think founders should have to dip in their personal savings to make their startup work. And I think it discourages people, but it sort of triggered that wave of like, YC had more unicorn companies, more funding, more VCs showing up, so that it became what it is today, which is, a powerhouse of startup creation and job creation.
I mean, for me, I remember like accepting the YC offer and being like, we're gonna not have money in a few months because we only got $20,000 in our batch. So it's such a weird batch. And I'll just say this to the listeners. We were the first batch that like went in there expecting $20,000, went through like a month and a half thinking all we're going to get is 20K, and we're going to have to like scramble and survive off 20K for this company. And then halfway through the company, Yuri Milner, who's an amazing investor, and Paul Graham, created this thing that just changed the game, where what Michael's saying, and now that you're talking through it, I didn't even think about it like that. It's the psychology of the entrepreneur changed, where they could recruit high quality Google engineers that would have never left because of their salary. Now they have a chance. But the true believers were like, you're kind of just all in regardless of the amount.
Yeah.
And for me, I was stressed as hell. I was like, it's going to be a rough go of it because we only have 20K to work with. You didn't feel relieved once they came in and said, we're going to give you, this 100.
Huge relief. I remember like it was such an exciting time.
It changed everyone's life, I think, in that cohort of YC.
Yeah.
Who did you think was going to be the biggest company in our batch?
That's a really interesting question. So, do you remember the wave of food?
Yeah.
I remember MemSQL in our batch, and people were like, this could be huge, like a little. Goat was our batch. I think my personal, and again, I don't remember how I actually put it back there, was probably Grub with Us. I thought those founders were amazing. And it's funny, Grub with Us didn't work. They pivoted to Goat, and Goat is, like, I remember right after I saw the company, I asked, it was too late by then, like, hey, can I invest in your company? It was the only company I was so super excited with. But I think at the time, like anything from Like a Little to, do you remember this company? It was like the hot consumer deal, our batch.
Oh, I thought they were the biggest one. I didn't want to mention it, but I thought they were the hottest.
MemSQL was super hot, and that's what its name has changed, but it's a massive company.
So, okay, so you were the first record in terms of acquisition. How long did it take from like start of YC to end of YC to get acquired? A couple of months?
Like, so YC is a free math program, right? They actually found us on demo day. There was a guy who, a guy I'm super grateful and is actually now an amazing investor, a guy named Ben Ling, who went on to start Bling Ventures. He was an angel investor, a really well-known one, investing in Gus, a bunch of different companies. He had showed up to demo day to angel invest. And halfway through, he was like, look, I want to talk to you guys about angel investing, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention Google would be interested in acquisition. We're like, wait, what are you talking? Like, where's this coming out of? And he at the time, I mean, again, there's a bunch more to this story, but like really, really prolific angel investor. So he's coming to YC demo day all the time. And he was senior enough at Google, had led some acquisitions like within Google on like, you know, the way Google acquisitions often work is like there needs to be a product person supporting it. And so he worked for Marissa Mayer, and so had a lot of senior executive support. Like he worked directly, he was one of the people who directly reported to her. He was starting something called Mobile Apps Lab, specifically focused on mobile products. This again, where like I remember a year in, Google was like, we want to be mobile first. Like every product should be designed with mobile first. And that was when like a lot of the Google Maps, I think at that time already, and search was leaning towards it, where half of everything on Google Maps was coming from mobile, like more than half. Search hadn't gone to that. I wouldn't be surprised if search and everything on Google right now is probably more than half of it through mobile. Like you don't use desktop now to use most of Google's products. But at the time, Maps was leading the way, right? Like it makes sense. Maps leading the way in terms of utility. And again, you talked about Uber. Like I think if Uber and all these things being enabled by geolocation, all these things that were happening at the time. And so Marissa was in charge of Google Local and like everything from Maps to small business, everything like that. One of the ideas she was thinking about is almost like an Apple app store for small businesses. And TalkBin at the time had insane engagement, and we can go to like, there's a lot to the story, but that's one of the reasons we got acquired. We were very small, but our engagement metrics were very strong.
Got it. So right place, right time, right idea.
Yeah.
Right everything to get that acquisition. It was like literally right after YC, which is insane. And that speaks to you guys like being savvy entrepreneurs. I think TalkBin would have been massive if it was still
maybe
here.
Maybe we weren't savvy. Maybe we should just go to our own company, and that would have been better. But I remember, like, it's funny. One thing that Drew, you know, had not a whole lot in pocket numbers that immigrant kids, like anything looks pretty big, and maybe we didn't hold out before because we knew we had stuff that we had to pay down. If had parents, we had to help. Like if you look at a lot of successful founders, they come from somewhat that are like upper middle class, where they don't, like, you don't want to be like so rich that you're like, you're not hungry, but you don't want to be like so poor that any number that people throw out at you, you're like, I'll take it, you know? So like, and then so sometimes you see the second company of these people who had the first egg, like they're looking for the bigger outcome, ends up doing really well and hitting up the unicorn. Like you get a lot of people sell their company for 10, 20, 30 million, and their next company is $1 billion plus.
What are your thoughts on like bootstrap startups? Because you already seen so much in the YC ecosystem and also liquid to ventures, right? So what about bootstrapped startups who can, you know, literally build out their products and MVPs with all these AI tools so quickly? So what are your thoughts on that? Like, should AI companies actually look for investment, or they should just go bootstrapped and build it themselves?
I say to people, like, and this is not just about anybody, your most valuable resource is time. So they can raise money to accelerate things in time you shut. Like there's a lot of companies, honestly, that could bootstrap. Like I've met a couple of founders who are profitable, could bootstrap, but a lot of times VCs are the most aggressive, chasing those people down. Like we'll give you 5 million, 10 million. If our work comes down between a choice between time versus dilution, time always wins out. Like one, because just again, if you don't take that money, somebody else will and maybe accelerate beyond you. But more importantly, like your most valuable resource as a founder, as a human being, is time. And so none of us are getting younger, and so they can use that. And I think it's great. And I think AI and even the market, you're going to see a lot more boost going to happen. I think that, like I was doing this post on like the cost to start a website. Like not just starting a website today is like nothing. Back in the day, you'd have to host your own servers. You'd have to have like people like running and make sure it's that like setting up an email server. It takes so long. Just before the age of MailChimp, like how do you even do that? Like all this stuff, cost has dramatically driven down, and AI will do that. There were people like, you know what? I don't need engineering dollars. I'm just going to have Copilot write it, or whatever else new tech is, ChatGPT or whatever, whatever ends up writing the code. And of course, today just got funded for a ton of money. Like whoever it is will write the code, and so the lower cost is, the less money to raise. But oftentimes, a founder in the early days, they need maybe one more engineer to really, really accelerate things. They absolutely should take the money. It just makes sense to, if they know they're on the right path. And especially for founders with product market fit, sometimes it's just a matter of increasing spend, increasing sales, and there's huge dividends to be paid for the winner of a space. That's the other thing I realized. Like the difference between number one and number two is often massive. Often you don't hear about number three, right? Like you know about Uber, Lyft, who's the third biggest car sharing company? Maybe still taxis, but I can't give you a good answer for that. But the different, like we know like the top 4 or 5 like search engines, right? Google and probably Bing, and but what's the 10th largest search engine? I don't know. It's not worth anywhere near Google. Like, so there's huge dividends to be paid to be a winner of the space. And sometimes money can play kingmaker. You can just throw enough resources, build enough features, whatever it is to win, in which case, of course, you should take the money to be a winner. So you should take the money to save time, you should take the money to be a winner. But if those dynamics aren't at play, and you often see they're not, like, you might as well retain control of your company and not take that dilution. Historically, I've seen this. Like maybe it's again a bad example, but like, because I actually don't know if they did end up taking money, but Craigslist, right? They were a dominant player for a long time in this kind of local classified space. But you also see, I would say, some of the negatives of not taking money. Like Airbnb, all these companies basically stripped out features, built really good verticalized solutions, and ultimately ate their lunch and became bigger than them. And maybe if they had a lot of actual capital, they wouldn't be doing that. They could have spun off these things, set up teams, and maybe it'd be worth a whole lot more than it would be today. But who knows, but like, I think, like, I've seen some dating sites, I've seen like a couple of sites over the years that have been like, they just found a moment in time, they were profitable early on, and they had no need for capital. And I think that's totally fine. And I think it'll become more common going forward.
Got it. So, Michael, I actually have a follow-up question to this one because I see you are also a part, you and Castor were also a part of CreatorDAO. And me coming from a Web3 background, I've also, looked into creators and the whole DAO structure. So let's say even a company, right? So what you're talking about is leverage. A company having a lot of leverage can actually pour a lot more money into marketing. But what I've seen is a lot of AI companies are actually reaching out to KOLs on YouTube and creators on YouTube to promote their product. But in this case, what if a creator himself is trying to bootstrap, right? Because creator has the leverage of media. Like, people know the creator, and he could actually just bootstrap it and then directly sell it to the audience, right? So from your insights of CreatorDAO, what do you think would happen here with the creator economy?
It's really hard to say. I think like what we've seen with like even Mr. Beast on his creators are brands within themselves. They're often like, it's funny, like a Mr. Beast beats like these companies that have been around for 100 years in the burger space. Like, he launched Mr. Beast Burger, he launched Feastables in the chocolate space of brand. So I think there's two questions at play. Like, how does a creator take bootstrap? And it's really interesting when you look at like retention of audience and really selling, like stuff like YouTube is really good. But when you look at discovery, TikTok's really good. So like, there's more and more discovery engines being built using AI. So now if you have good content, they can actually search. Back in the day, let's say you created the best video of all time and, a decade plus ago, you post it on YouTube, and YouTube's discovery in the early days was today. Nobody would ever see it unless you shared a link. So there was no way to really bootstrap a creator. Now, somebody creates a video. I mean, this is, again, really bad example, but I don't know if you've seen the Hawk 2 girl meme. She does one interview, and she starts a podcast. It's one of the most watched podcasts in America within like months of her interview, though. That never would have happened. And so the ability to get distribution, build up your brand off of one viral moment, and then suddenly, she's selling tokens, she's doing all this other stuff. Like, that was never possible. It is possible now. It's a combination of technology, AI, distribution, everything coming together at a moment in time. The other one is creators themselves becoming brands and effectively launching products. Again, something never possible before. Like, you see this with the Kardashians, all these different celebrities. And again, I'll use Mr. Beast's example. Like, back in the day, you didn't have the concept of ghost kitchens. You didn't have the concept of what that's today. That somebody like that can, like, I'll use another example, but like Logan Paul with Prime, like, starting a drink company takes a lot of work, but suddenly you have distribution, you have all these things that effectively can be disintermediated, decentralized, and also scaled up in ways. So I do think you'll see these people with audiences on, maybe for SaaS businesses, and they'll click one button, AI builds a SaaS business that builds a newsletter for them that does this. And so I've yet to see what will happen, but anybody with an audience will be able to monetize. And again, who knows what will happen with TikTok in the come this Sunday, but like, this ability to get distribution really quickly, build an audience, and then build a business on top of that will all accelerate. And again, we're seeing this in real time. And I don't think we've seen it in SaaS and enterprise as quickly, but I can, again, maybe I'll use a random example, but like 20-minute VC, Harry Stebbins, like, built a brand virtually overnight and now has like, 100 million VC fund. Like, that is going from building a brand. And again, I think virtually overnight is a long time. He took a long time to build that brand and get that, but he didn't come from the world of venture to now starting a business. And again, that speed is way faster than any other time in history.
Got it. So you either have access to capital or have a lot of distribution. And I just want to, read out something that you posted on LinkedIn. I think that's very important for our Just Paid audience as well. So you basically say for all the AI companies that are starting out, there are basically two conclusions to draw. One of them is niche improvement on current GPT versions will be literally squashed. The second is if your product is positioned to benefit from the model's performance, it'll be more valuable. So the second point, I think it's super important for any AI company. So if you can, throw some light on that, we would really appreciate it.
Maybe I'll start with an example where a founder pitches like, he had a very honest discussion with me. He's like, everything I pitched was virtually impossible, but now with the AI agent stuff that's coming out with ChatGPT, it's now slowly possible. And it didn't come from his work. It came from like billion-dollar companies pushing the frontier of AI to make that stuff possible. And so we've never been in a time where founders can have these crazy promises and not even have to work on their own product, just hope that the underlying models get better and better. And so far, it looks like the speed they're getting better at is that like we went from large language models to agents, right? Like agents are the new cool thing. Like that actually is a revolutionary step, right? From producing just large amounts of content to suddenly the agents are doing stuff, interacting, they're like taking actual actions. And who knows what 2-3 years from now, what these AI foundation models are launching. And so if you can benefit from that, again, this is, I'm going on a slight tangent here, but a lot of times you saw these companies spend years building something, and by the time it came out, the graphics had changed. Or like some fundamental thing, like imagine you spent years building some on-prem solution, everything's moving to the cloud now. Or you spent years building for desktop and mobile was now the future. Like you can imagine something like, I found some way to build Uber on the desktop. You gotta like, pre-book sometime and it can't detect your GPS, but you can store it and you have these user accounts. And then Uber comes out, it's like you take out your mobile phone and immediately text where you press a button and calls it. You get destroyed. And not because you've had the wrong idea, but because the world's fundamentally changed and technology layers change and your ideas are no longer relevant. Like just think about how much more work it is. And again, laptops today have all GPS stuff, but like back then, let's say you're like, okay, I want to build a Uber competitor, and you just so happen you came out before the dawn of mobile phone. They can give everybody a device that tracks them. I got to ship out all this hardware to them, and then you got to press a button, and the button then calls it, but then it stores your information. You got to enter it in a website, and then you press a button, and your physical stuff. We're gonna mail out all these physical little devices, and they're like, oh, it's genius, because now you can imagine receive like, oh, that's genius. Now they have a device on their hands. You own the user, and then mobile phones come out. It's like, why would I hold a device that? And you can imagine like back in the day, that could have been a brilliant idea, right? Like, and imagine any point in time you press a button, and a car comes to you. And that seems like magic. That could be a revolutionary billion-dollar idea. But in age of mobile, shipping those devices no longer makes sense because the person. And so when the world changes that way, and you see this with a lot of the age old fast, and the best founders are making that back and seeing and reaping the rewards of that.
Absolutely. It's more like you're either telling AI what to do, or AI is going to tell you what to do. Like soon enough, that's how it's going to be, right? And I also have like another question, right? So I really wanted to understand about community, because you also have a good community, right? District is something that you're working on as well. So what are your thoughts on having like a tight-knit community? Because what I see from your conversation is like you guys are, go way back to 2011 and you guys are still connected. Relationships are compounding, right? And what are your thoughts on networking and building relationships, connecting with people and everything?
The fancy term for that is community. The networking term is networking. A lot of for me is just making friends. There's a lot of different terms, and it best fits in two different ways. One, purely from a career standpoint, also from a social, it's a lot tougher to make your friends in your 30s. Like you don't have school or anything else. So I think community is just a way to make those friends. I think it benefits your mental health a ton. I think post-COVID, you've seen just people are getting lonelier and lonelier. And that's partially a purpose of District, get some of the best founders together to help each other, both professionally and socially, and make friends. And I do think I look at like a lot of different aspects, like Liquid 2 Ventures, the VC firm I started, would not be as successful if I didn't go for YC. It just wouldn't happen. I wouldn't have met a lot of companies. There's so many times I meet a YC founder and have these shared experiences, and so I'm part of that community. A lot of times, I've had to fundraise, and the HBS thing comes in handy because there's a lot of people with high net worth that happen to go to Harvard, either undergrad or grad school. And so that's how I look at community. I think it's very abstract. I think it's a way to It certainly helped my career a lot. I want to have some of that magic and like just to pivot off Creator DAO, but both of them had a similar theme, which is like, if I bring a group of people together, make them all owners of something, be it, this crypto entity called a DAO, will people come closer together? And the answer seems to be yes so far. Again, it's an experiment. I think a lot of startups are experiments until we get it right.
Going back a little bit, the batch, a lot of people from YC after YC and their companies either failed or became successful. Some of them just faded away and just I haven't heard from them, right, from our batch. And others like went all in. And I kind of view you as like a person because you're actually, you're very humble, but you're a very active investor in Silicon Valley. So like you kind of went all in into Silicon Valley and you're like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to become an investor. I'm going to figure this out. Like you kind of reinvented yourself from like, entrepreneur, successful exit. You probably could have worked at Google for a long time. Love it or hate it. You could have been there for 20 years if you wanted to be, right? Like, but you're like, I'm going to just leave and just go start, at some point a venture, like your own venture firm. Liquid, you briefly mentioned Liquid 2 VC, but it was a big part of your life.
A huge part still is. Yeah.
Why do that when you just could have worked at Google? Like, why double down on like Silicon Valley?
I loved working at Google and I still do. I think a part of me wanted to be a founder again. And the way to be close to it was to be a VC in a lot of ways. And I had a chance to start a VC fund with Joe Montana. It was a unique moment in time. And he treated like a lot like a startup. We built it together. Myself, Mike Miller, also another YC founder, Nate Montana. Like we built like a startup. We're still figuring things out. And I love that aspect of it. I think Google operates at such a big scale. Like to have the day-to-day impact, I really like venture. You get to fund amazing companies as they start up. And at least a few of these companies told me like, hey, they wouldn't have been funded without our help, and they've gone on to create tons of jobs, impact the world positively. So I think a venture is a really great way to make an impact, stay close to the ecosystem. It's a job. I'm saying like you literally get to talk to smart people as part of your job. Like there's not a job that isn't that great that I've thought of. And it's just honestly like I always hoped I had one more startup in me. I didn't have an idea I was passionate about at the time, so I thought back towards the closest way. I thought staying at Google wouldn't be that, and I still think Google's great, but I didn't feel like that way to stay close to startups. You stay close to tech, the less startups.
Got it. I mean, the more that I learn about venture, I think for the successful firms, they have to be all in for like decades. So I think there's a lot of like fly by night firms, meaning like, let me try this. And they realize they can't get rich in like a year. And you've been doing this a long time. Like Liquid 2 VC is successful at this point. It's like, it's here to stay. Right. So like, I think it speaks to you, like you started a successful company, exited it, then started honestly, one of the best firms in Silicon Valley.
Oh, you're too kind. I really appreciate that. And we try to be that.
Yeah, I think one ending question would just be like, what about someone who doesn't have access to capital? I think you already touched upon this already, but do you think they should rapidly just go ahead, build using all these AI agents, and then ship the product ASAP, and then look for capital? Maybe a short pointer would be appreciated.
Yeah, look, I think there's two different ways to go about it. Rapidly build product so it's in people's hands, or again in the creator economy, rapidly build audience so that when you do ship product, like think about let's say you don't have access to capital, but you're like, I have 1 million users who are down to try my product. You're gonna get access to capital, and you're gonna let's say you're not technical even. If you're technical, you should build product. That is the fastest way. If you have product in people's hands, it's good. Guess what? Other people will talk, and you will have customers, and you will get financing because people are like, this is a freaking amazing product. I definitely met founders over the years. Like you meet founders who are great at pitching, you meet founders who are bad at pitching. As a job VC is actually to ignore both and be like, what's the best product? Like, and a lot of times actually people bad at pitching build great products, and that's the diamond in the rough you really want to find because those are usually undervalued great deals. Let's say you don't have access to product and you can't build it, then build audience. So that one day you can find somebody technical and like, hey, I have 1 million people who follow me in this very specific vertical. They all want to try products that I do because I've had such a great audience, a community, whatever you want to call it. Bam, that technical people join you. But otherwise, if you're technical, you don't use AI, use it whatever you can. But like, I personally don't care what you use, but get product in people's hands. That's all that matters.
So launch fast.
Exactly, launch fast.
Let's go YC advice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael, for joining. This was a lot of fun. It was fun to get into your mind.
Yeah.
your psychology of like how you became successful.
Thank
It's a
you.
wrap.
Thank you. Take care, both of you.